I'll start again. We talk about seeing in different ways, don't we? So I look around me and I see the walls of the building and the ceiling of the building and so on. I see, that's seeing with the eyes in my head, isn't it? That's the main way we talk about seeing. But sometimes, say, if you're in school and your teacher is explaining to you something, a difficult concept or something in maths, and then suddenly you get it, and what do you say? Oh, I see. That's what you say. And that's a different kind of seeing, isn't it? That's sort of seeing with the understanding. You suddenly understand it, suddenly get it. So you say, I see. Now, we have this story here, this account of the blind man, the man who was born blind, who could not see with the eyes in his head, if he had any. But then Jesus enabled him to see with the eyes in his head. He opened his eyes so that he could see. But I think John, in the way that he tells us this story, he wants us to see that other kind of seeing. He wants us to know that this man didn't just see with the eyes in his head, he saw in another way as well. Jesus gave him sight in another way as well. But not the sight of understanding, a third kind of sight, spiritual sight. Jesus gave to him. And today I want to speak to you about how Jesus gave this man these two kinds of sight. The sight with his eyes and his head, and that spiritual sight and what that means. So that's what we're going to be thinking about this afternoon. The way that Jesus healed this man, I don't know whether you read it and thought, that's a bit of a funny way to go about things, spitting on the floor and making this kind of mud out of the spittle and the dust of the ground, and then putting it on the man's eyes. That's what Jesus did, wasn't it? There's another place where Jesus, it reminded me of another man that Jesus healed in a similar kind of fashion. It's found in Mark's Gospel. I'll just read to you it's a very short account that we have there. Mark chapter 8 and verse 22. Where are we? Here we are. It says, Mark chapter 8 verse 22. Then Jesus came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. Then he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up. And he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Then he sent him away to his house, as Jesus sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town nor tell anyone in the town. Interestingly. So this time, in this healing, Jesus took the man by the hand, led him out of the town, away from the people, and then spat on his eyes and touched him. And it's a very strange one, this. A very strange one, because he didn't immediately see clearly. I'm sure also that Jesus, when he did that, told them what he was going to do. I'm sure the Lord Jesus would have said, now this is what I'm going to do, because he couldn't see what was going to happen. So he would have explained it to him, I'm sure. So Jesus asked the man if he saw anything. Now that's very strange. Jesus never did that before with any other kind of healing. But he did on this occasion. Can you see anything? And the man did, didn't he? He saw something, but he saw the men, and they were like trees walking, which I think must mean he had very blurred vision or something like that, to make people look like that. And then Jesus touched him and touched his eyes, I think it says. Yeah, he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up. And then he could see clearly with perfect vision. This is the only occasion that we've got in the Bible, in the New Testament, where Jesus healed a person in 2 stages. Every other healing was immediate and complete. But this one occurred in 2 stages. So it's not because Jesus couldn't do it in one go. It's not because he had a go at it and it didn't quite work, so then he had to have another go at it. So if it's not that, what could it be? That Jesus did it in that way, in 2 stages.
Is it because the body and the soul are related? The physical side works best through the soul, so that you need to have your soul as well as your eyes in order to see completely.
Well, it could be. We're not actually told much about this man in terms of how he responded to Jesus by faith or anything, are we? We're not told that, but it could well be the case. I thought perhaps it was simply that if it had happened all at once, it might have been too much of a shock for him. And that's why the Lord Jesus did it in 2 stages. And I think that because you see, he also led him away from the town, away from the crowds, to a place where it was quieter and where there wasn't so much going on. And I think it reveals how the Lord Jesus treated people, always with great gentleness. Always treated people with great gentleness. And that's why what I think also, and I refer you back to that one, because I think, and there are others like it as well. There's another one like it with a deaf man as well, where he does the same thing. Takes him outside the town and then restores his hearing. And you look at what happens with the man born blind in John chapter 9, and how Jesus did it. Again, Jesus used his spittle, but this time to make the clay and to put it on the man's eyes. I'm sure he told him that's what he was going to do. So he would have had this stuff on his eyes. And I'm sure Jesus didn't do that to provoke a dispute with the Pharisees on the Sabbath. Because him making clay to them was work. And so therefore they said he worked on the Sabbath. And they were always having to go at him for doing things on the Sabbath that they thought he never ought to be doing. So that was the outcome, a dispute with the Pharisees. But I'm sure Jesus didn't do it that way just for that, or not for that at all. I think it was for the same reason as before. It was out of compassion for the man that Jesus did it this way. Because for a man who had never seen anything, now he was born blind. The other man obviously wasn't born blind. He'd become blind. He knew what men looked like and everything. So when he saw men as trees walking, he didn't think, oh, well, that's what they look like. He knew that they weren't supposed to look like that. This man had never seen anything before. He's only had the use of his other senses. Jesus is always surrounded by crowds. And in Jerusalem, there would have been nowhere. There's no way Jesus could have taken this man anywhere away from the crowds to do this for him. So I think this is why Jesus says, and again, it's only on this occasion, he actually sends the man away. He puts the stuff on his eyes and sends him away to go to the pool of Siloam to wash. And of course he's got the clay on his eyes. This is good enough reason for him to go and wash it off. And this pool of Siloam, there is a pool in Jerusalem today that you can go and see. And it might well be the same one. There were others it could possibly be. But the pool of Siloam was fed from water from a spring, Gihon spring, if that's the right pronunciation. It's brought into Jerusalem through a tunnel that was dug by Hezekiah some 700 years before Jesus was born. And that tunnel is there, isn't it, still? And the water comes through the tunnel into the pool. And so the man goes to the pool. The crowds are not going to follow the man. They're staying with Jesus. And the place around the pool isn't big enough to get masses of people into there. So Jesus sent him away to a place where it's quieter. He was blind. He would have had to have somebody lead him there, friends or family, somebody with him who he knew would take him to the place so that he could wash off the clay. So when he gets there, what is it? He's in quieter surroundings. When he opens his eyes and sees for the first time, what does he see? Well, he sees people he knows. He sees something familiar to him. And I think all of this is happening because Jesus, when he was going around and he was preaching and teaching and he was doing these healings, but he wasn't doing this simply because he wanted to make new recruits to follow him. He cared about these men, these people, as people. He cared for them, who they were. He cared about what they would feel like when he did these wonderful things for them. That's what Jesus was like. You need to know the same thing, don't you? We all need to know that Jesus cares for us, for who we are as people, and for what matters to us. And here's the wonderful thing, isn't it? That Jesus is God, the God of heaven, the righteous judge of all things. He cares about you, cares about what you're frightened about, cares about what will harm you. God cares. And I want you to know this God, this Jesus, who cares. Think about that testimony. That man found out that Jesus cared about him, cared about the terrible struggle that he was having with addiction, and transformed his life, cared about his family, who didn't seem to really care about him, having chucked him out into the cold. But Jesus cared about them. So this story, it seems to me, highlights that fact that Jesus cares for people, individuals, and what's going on with them. And now think about the blind man opening his eyes. When he opened his eyes, what did he see? I don't know whether you've ever thought about that. I was thinking about it. What did he see? Never seen before. And he would have seen all the familiar things that we see, wouldn't he? The buildings, the people, the goods on sale, the streets, all the different things. But being a bit colourblind myself, I think one of the most amazing things about seeing, if you're a blind person, you've never seen, you can feel, can't you? You can feel the shape of things. Yeah, you can feel whether things are hard and soft and the textures and things like that. You can feel those things. But colour, you have no idea, would you? That things are different colours. And suddenly your eyes are open and wow, you see all these amazing different colours around you. What a thing to see. But this is what I wanted to get across, isn't it? The blind man saw that with these eyes in his head. But he also saw something else. He saw something even more wonderful than that. And it wasn't Jesus. That's another thing about this story, you see. When his eyes were opened, Jesus wasn't there. He was somewhere else. But he opened his eyes, and he saw who Jesus was. He didn't see Jesus physically, but he saw who Jesus was. That's what he saw. He knew, didn't he? Well, you look at what it says about what this man knew. And verse 11, a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes. He knew that he was called Jesus. And it was Jesus who had healed him. He knew that he was a prophet, verse 17. So this is going on a bit now from what we've read. The Pharisees caught up with him, you see, and were questioning him because they were this matter about the Sabbath. They wanted to get this man to condemn Jesus for making clay to open his eyes on the Sabbath. Verse 17, they said to the blind man again, what do you say about him because he opened your eyes? He said, the blind man said, or the one who was blind, he is a prophet. He is a prophet. What's a prophet? Yeah, somebody sent by God with a message from God. That's what a prophet is. Somebody sent by God with a message from God. So he knew that Jesus was a prophet. So he says that explicitly, doesn't he, a bit later on. Verse 32. Again, it's the Pharisees. He's having this conversation with the Pharisees. He says, since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. So he knew Jesus was a prophet. He knew Jesus was from God. He knew that Jesus did these things with the power of God. He knew that. The Pharisees didn't know that. They're the Pharisees. They can't work this out. But he knows it. This man who was born blind. He hasn't worked out much else. So he says in verse 25, whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see. So that light of understanding hasn't percolated much. But he knows there's something very special about Jesus, and he is from God. And this man wants to follow Jesus. He wants to be a disciple of Jesus. Again, speaking to the Pharisees, verse 27, he answered them, I told you, they asked him again, how did he open your eyes? I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? Then they reviled him and said, you are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. Not very good ones at that. You are his disciple. Do you also want to become his disciples? So this man, he's never seen Jesus. He's only heard him and had him anoint his eyes, but he wants to be his disciple. He wants to follow him. He knows there's something so special about Jesus. So what's happened here? That the light of the sun has entered this man's eyes for the first time. But John wants us to see that not only the light of the sun entered his eyes, but the light of the Son of God has entered his heart and has changed him. And it's the first time. And how can we tell? And I think we can tell by this. That the blind man who is now can see, he stands up to the Pharisees. They tell him they're going to throw him out of the synagogue. They're going to excommunicate him. So he's no longer able to meet with the people in the synagogue and worship God, like being thrown out of the church. They're going to do that to him. And they did do that to him. They threw him out. But he stood up for Jesus anyway. He didn't cave in. He was definitely going to be a disciple of the Lord Jesus. He hasn't even seen Jesus in person yet, but he loves him. He knows Jesus is from God. And what's more, as we've seen, he knows that Jesus from God cares for him and loves him. So he knows all of these things. His eyes have been opened to see it. His eyes have been opened to see Jesus, who he is. And then Jesus heard about it, so the news must have spread. Oh, this man who Jesus healed. They've thrown him out of the synagogue. And the news gets back to Jesus. So we read that in verse 35. Jesus heard that they had cast him out. And when he had found him, so Jesus went to look for him then. When he had found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" Now that's interesting, isn't it? Jesus didn't go looking for him until he heard that he'd been cast out of the synagogue. Because Jesus realizes then, here's a man, God, that work of God has happened in him. He now knows who I am. So he says, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" He answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you." Then he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshipped him. He worshipped him. So you see, his eyes are opened. Here is God. And he knows it. He knows who Jesus is. It's not something he's learned intellectually in his head. He knows it in here. His eyes have been opened to see it. It's an evident truth to him who Jesus is. That here is God. And it's wonderful, isn't it? There's a saying, seeing is believing. But this blind man believed without seeing, with the eyes. And Jesus says to him those two things. You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you. At this point, with his physical eyes, he can see Jesus. Jesus is there in front of him. But he can't see the Son of God unless he has spiritual eyes. He can see the man who's talking with him, but he can't see the Son of God without having spiritual eyes. And that's what he had. That's what Jesus had given to him. And the wonderful thing is, when you think about it, it's no easier or harder for you and I to see that Jesus is the Son of God than it was for him. Never seen him with his eyes. He just knew that this wonderful thing had happened to him. And it was through this man. Have you seen yet that Jesus is the Son of God? Have you had your spiritual eyes opened? The Apostle John, who wrote these things down, he was with Jesus for 3 years. And he was following him everywhere. And John is telling us this because he saw all these things. He witnessed them himself. And he tells you at the end of John's Gospel why he wrote these things down. It's in John chapter 20, verse 30. And it says, "And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name." And this man, he believed. "I believe," he said. And he worshipped Jesus. He had life. He had something going on in him because of it. Just like that man that we read about, whom the Lord changed. He gave him life. And when he had life, his life changed. His life was different to what it was before. He lived differently. He could rejoice. He could be filled with joy. This man too, the blind man, filled with joy. Because Jesus gave him life. Do you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God? Do you believe in the Son of God? It's not the same thing. Do you believe in the Son of God? Have you committed yourself to him like that man? See how he committed himself to Jesus. There's no real believing unless there's commitment. Again, this testimony. He didn't, when his dad was going to throw him out, he didn't say, oh, no, I'll come back to Islam. No, it was a commitment to Jesus. He got thrown out into the cold. It's very, very cold over there in the winter. But he stuck it. He was filled with that glow because of what Jesus had done for him. Have you got that? It's life. It's the life of God working. Have you got that? Do you believe in the Son of God? Do you have life in his name? Jesus cares for you. He cares for you so much that he went and died on that cross for you. You can't have any of these things that we're talking about here without his death upon the cross. There he paid the price for us to have this glorious, this wonderful life, eternal. Do you know this Jesus? That's the question. And do you believe in him? I pray it may be so. And we're going to sing. We're going to sing again, if that's all right. We're going to close with Jesus, the very thought of thee, with sweetness fills my breast.